Hey y'all, I am back with a new dinner video. I'm going to include 5 dinner recipes that I have recently made my family, as well as a dessert at the end. So first up, I made white chicken chili. This is a family favorite that is absolutely delicious. We love to enjoy this during the fall time and also the winter months. And this is one recipe that I love to use a rotisserie chicken for. So I just simply chopped one up, and then to a large pot, I'm melting down a couple tablespoons of butter and throwing in a couple tablespoons of all-purpose flour. I'm going to get those two things whisked together, and I'm going to let that cook down for a couple of minutes. This is what's going to thicken up the soup later on. So I measured out 3 cups of chicken broth, and I'm just kind of slowly pouring that in while I'm whisking, as well as 1 cup of some half and half. I let that simmer for like 5 minutes just until it started to like slightly thicken. Then I threw in that chopped chicken. I'm also going to grab 2 cans of beans. These are the white kidney beans. I did drain and rinse those, but usually I use northern beans, and I do much prefer those in this recipe. I think the kidney beans are just kind of too big and they're a little bit tough, so definitely recommend the northern beans. I did add in 1 can of some white corn that I drained, as well as 1 can of some diced green chilies. You can bump that up to 2, and I was going to, but I didn't have the second can like I thought I did. But now I'm just seasoning it up with some onion and garlic powder, cumin, chili powder, and just some salt and pepper to taste. So of course I'm going to get that mixed together really well, and I'm just going to let that simmer at like a low boil for like 15-20 minutes. So meanwhile, I'm going to grab a block of pepper jack cheese and get that shredded up. Normally, I use a like sharp white cheddar, and again, I prefer that over the pepper jack. I thought I would give the pepper jack a try, and it did make it creamy and give it maybe a little bit more spice. Not too much though, or my kids wouldn't have ate it. But the white sharp cheddar, you can actually taste it, while I feel like the pepper jack kind of got lost. So that's just my 2 recommendations that I would change. But yeah, the way we like to serve it is with some sour cream and some extra cheese. Sometimes we'll treat it like a normal chili and just crush up some crackers in it, but it's also really good with some tortilla chips to kind of scoop it up. This is so good. We love this recipe. And my kids, it's one of their favorites. They both came back for seconds, and they both wanted leftovers the next day. So I would say that's a win. So if you are looking for a good white chicken chili recipe, this is the one. Next up, I tried out a new recipe that looked really good on Pinterest, and I was really excited to make this one. This is creamy Dijon pork chops. I'm also going to show me making just a couple simple sides. This is some garlic parmesan rice. So I melted down some butter and threw in some minced garlic. I was going to use fresh garlic in all the recipes in this video, but all of my garlic went bad, sadly. So the jar stuff's good too. So I added in a little over a cup of some washed long grain rice, and I'm doing 2 cups of broth. Well, I had 1 cup of chicken broth, and I had to do another cup of water because I ran out. I'm going to throw in some dried parsley. Also, if you've been watching my recent videos, this is that same Instant Pot rice that I have been bragging about. You can make it on the stovetop, obviously, as well, and it's still good, but I will say the Instant Pot's better. I did decide to throw in some of this roasted garlic, better than bouillon, just to give it some extra flavor. I waited for that to come up to a boil, and then I added the lid, turned it down to low, and I set a timer for 15 minutes. I'm also going to be making some roasted broccoli. I washed it and chopped it earlier in the day to make this go faster. Drizzled it with some olive oil and seasoned it with some garlic, salt, and black pepper. Very easy. Threw that on a tinfoil lined cookie sheet, and I baked that at 400 degrees for about 15-20 minutes. So now I can finally get started on these pork chops. So I heated up some olive oil in my large skillet, and I'm just throwing in my pork chops seasoned side down. And I went very simple with the seasonings on these because of the flavorful sauce that I'm going to make, but it's just salt and pepper. And I'm just going to let that sear for a few minutes on each side until it's fully cooked through. And I only like to flip my meat once. That way it can really develop some color. So at this point, my rice was done, so I just fluffed it up, added in a little bit of shredded Parmesan cheese. I stirred that until it melted, and it is done. I'm just going to leave it on that burner with the heat off, and it will stay nice and hot until it's time to eat. So back to the pork chops. Now they are fully cooked, so I'm just going to get those removed to a separate plate, and then I'm going to add in a few slices of bacon that I chopped up. I just did that with some scissors, and I'm just going to cook that up, and as it cooks down, all of those flavorful bits from the bottom will release, and that's going to go so good in the sauce. It's just extra flavor. So This is the stage that we like it. We like it pretty crispy. I'm going in with a slotted spoon and putting it in a separate bowl. That way all the grease can still like remain in the skillet. You'll need that for the sauce. I've tossed in about a tablespoon of butter. You're going to need some more garlic, and I'm going to start adding in a few seasonings. So we've got some dry thyme. At this point, I noticed my butter was starting to brown really quickly, so I was quickly getting those spices in, but I also added in some dried rosemary and basil, and all of those spices combined made my kitchen smell so good. I just love it. I also added in about a half a cup of some chicken broth. I let that reduce down a bit, and then I added in 1 cup of some heavy whipping cream. And you'll also need some Dijon mustard. So I added in about 2 tablespoons of that. So I'm just getting that mixed into the sauce until it's all really nice and smooth. And then I'm just seasoning it to taste with some salt and pepper. I let that simmer until it started to thicken, and then I added in about a 1/4 cup of some shredded Parmesan cheese, as well as about a handful of spinach. You could add more if you want to, or you could just leave it out altogether, just whatever suits your family. Mine isn't crazy about cooked spinach like this, so that's why I added so little. But if it was just me, I would have like tripled that amount. But anyways, that's it for the sauce. I'm just going to add back in those pork chops to let those heat back through. And that cooked bacon, I'm just sprinkling some over the top. But I left some so that I could sprinkle it on like each individual dish. But here is the finished product. I think that looks so good. I did top everything with some extra Parmesan cheese. And I put plenty of that sauce over the rice. And this meal was incredible. Definitely recommend this recipe. It's definitely one of our new favorite pork chop recipes. The pork was so tender and that sauce was so flavorful. I definitely give this one 2 thumbs up. Next up is going to be a crock pot recipe, and this was another new one for us. It's going to be a Swiss steak. So I started by chopping 2 large carrots and just throwing that in the bottom. Next, I grabbed my meat, so you'll either need some cube steaks or some round steak like I'm using. So I know it's a little bit pricey, a little over $13, but the way I see it, it's still cheaper than all 4 of us going out to eat, even at McDonald's, and you get 4 large portions. I had everything else on hand, so that's all I spent for this meal. So I guess it wasn't too bad. But as you can see, I'm just taking those 2 long pieces of meat and just chopping that to make 4 pieces. The next thing I did was place that between 2 pieces of some cling wrap, and I'm just going to pound that out until it's nice and thin and even thickness. I'm just doing that with my little meat mallet with a little pointy side down, and that's kind of fun to do. I kind of enjoy that. But obviously I'm going to repeat that to all of them, and here I am just seasoning them with some salt and pepper on both sides. Obviously feel free to use whatever mix of seasonings you want to here. I think next time I would at least add some garlic powder as well. But yeah, so now I'm just going to roll it around in some plain all-purpose flour. I'm just going to make sure that both sides are perfectly well coated, and then I'm just going to kind of give it a shake to make sure all the excess comes off. I've already got some olive oil heated up in my skillet. My skillet was nice and hot. I got those dropped in, and I'm just going to sear those for a couple of minutes per side. I am not trying to cook these all the way through. I'm just trying to develop a little bit of a crust for some extra flavor. So here I am doing the second batch. I had to add in some more olive oil since the first batch kind of soaked it all up. And yeah, I'm just repeating that. Once that was done, I removed it to a separate plate, and here, this is kind of optional. The recipe said to just dump everything else in the crock pot, but it made the most sense to me to do it right in that same skillet that I seared that beef in. So in the first step, I just kind of added a little bit of beef broth to deglaze everything, and then I'm adding in about 2 tablespoons of tomato paste, which was what was left in that little tube. I'm just going to roll that around a little bit, and I'm going to also throw in some minced garlic, let those 2 things saute for just a little bit. Next, I'm going to add in a can of crushed tomatoes. You can do diced tomatoes if you want to. Either or is fine. I just wanted a bit of a smoother sauce. I'm also going to measure out a cup of beef broth, add that in, as well as a few dashes of Worcestershire sauce. I'm going to add in just a little bit of some dried thyme, and then just some salt and pepper to taste. That is it. Going to get that mixed together. By the way, my heat is off. I'm not trying to cook this sauce or anything. This is basically just my mixing bowl, and it was the best way in my mind to get that tomato paste like perfectly blended in. But here I am adding that meat right on top of the carrots, followed by that sauce, and that is it. I'm just going to cover it with a lid, and I chose to cook mine on high, and it took 3 hours for mine. I checked it at the 3 hour mark, and I'm really glad I came in early because at this point the meat was perfectly fall apart tender, and I think that if I would have let it go 4 hours like I originally planned, it probably would have been dried out. And as you can see, the carrots are perfectly cooked as well. So here's my plate. I just served everything over some homemade mashed potatoes, and I came in with some dried parsley just to give it kind of like a pop of color, but this turned out great. We have never had Swiss steak before, didn't really know what to expect, but it reminded us a lot of like a beef stew. Tasted very similar, except it was obviously more like tomatoey than a beef stew would be, but pretty low effort, a lot less effort than a beef stew would be, and surprisingly the carrots were my favorite part. This next dinner is another one that I was really excited to try out. I saw this idea a while back on TikTok. I saved that video, so I will definitely link it in my description box in case any of you guys want to go and watch it. But she called it pizza pot pies. I would call it like an upside down pizza. But basically, you just need as many ramekins that will feed your family, spray them with some nonstick cooking spray inside and out. Grab you some pizza sauce and layer some on the bottom, as little or as much as you want. We are a saucy family. We like a lot of sauce, but do keep in mind that you'll need to add more sauce on top as well. I did go ahead and shred a block of mozzarella cheese, so I'm just layering that in the bottom, followed by some shredded Parmesan cheese, and I'm also going to add a slice of this provolone to each bowl. Now, this one I bought at Kroger, this private selection one. That was my first time ever buying it, and it is honestly the best provolone cheese I have ever had in my whole life. Next time I go to Kroger, I am stocking up. I'm telling y'all, you need to try it if you like provolone. But next, you'll want to add your toppings. Just whatever your favorite pizza toppings is what you'd add here. We're pretty basic. We're just going with some pepperoni. That's what I'm going to add to mine, Josh's, and Riley's. Boston likes pepperoni every now and then, but his favorite type of pizza is just a cheese pizza. So that's why I didn't add any to his. But if you want to add different meats, go for it. Veggies, just whatever you want. And then you're going to add that other layer of the sauce that I was talking about. I'm just spraying that over the top. And then I am going to be using these little mini pizza crust. I figured that would fit perfectly over these, but boy, was I wrong. I had a time and a half getting those to fit. I used a rolling pin to stretch those as thin as I possibly could. And since the outsides were pretty slippery, it was a bit of a pain, but I finally got all of them ready. And the next thing I'm going to do is make a little seasoned oil to brush over the top. So to this little cup, I'm just adding in a little bit of olive oil, and I'm seasoning it with some garlic powder, oregano, and some parsley. So I'm just taking my little silicone brush, and I'm just doing an even layer all over the top and sides. And that's going to bake at 400 degrees for about 15 minutes. And as you can see, only one of these turned out perfect. The others kind of caved in where the dough was, it just was too short, I guess, is how you would explain that. But I did lift those up to make sure the bottoms were like cooked through and not doughy, and they weren't, so I just kind of left it alone. I didn't know how else to brown the middles. But lastly, you'll just want to take that remaining oil and just kind of brush it over the hot crust. For the ones that caved in, I just kind of did the edges. But yeah, so the most stressful part of this was trying to get these flipped out. Until I figured out the trick. That first one was such a pain. I didn't know what to do. So what I learned is to take a butter knife to kind of break that suction, and it'll fall right out. Yes, I absolutely did burn my hand off trying to do that. I don't know a better way, but I will say that these were 1,000% worth all the effort of getting that out. They came out so delicious. We all really enjoyed it. Even the kids. I was not sure if they would like this. I was a little worried about it, but they both cleaned their plates. And I swear that provolone cheese that I was talking about is what made these. It gave it such a good flavor, and it was just a fun, different way to do pizza night. I can't wait to remake these with different toppings. So over the weekend, we had some friends over, and I made some crockpot barbecue pulled pork. So I had to find a way to use up the leftovers. So I also found some corn tortillas that are about to expire. So I automatically thought enchilada casserole. I've never done it with barbecue pulled pork before, but I figured it would work just fine. So I got some shredded Colby Jack cheese and a can of enchilada sauce. So I sprayed a 8x8 baking dish with some Pam. I added just the smallest amount of enchilada sauce on the bottom because all I was working with was that small little can. That's all I had, so I had to really make it stretch. Next, I'm going to layer on some corn tortillas, or you can do flour. I have done it with both. And when I make like a normal enchilada casserole with like beef, chicken, whatever. But anyways, I took two, overlapped it, then took a third one, kind of tore it in half to make it fit the bottom. Next, I'm just layering on that pulled pork. I found it easiest to do with a fork. And then I'm just going to layer on some of that Colby Jack cheese. And then I'm just going to start drizzling over some of that enchilada sauce. And this one's medium. I keep on accidentally buying the medium one, and it is pretty spicy. So it's probably a good thing that I had such a small amount. But anyways, I repeated those layers twice. Then I got it covered with some tinfoil, and I baked it at 350 degrees for 30 minutes. Then I took off the tinfoil and I let it bake for an additional 5 minutes to melt that cheese down. So there you can see the nice layers. It's nice and bubbly. And I did wait about 10 minutes before I cut into it. That way it doesn't just like completely fall apart. I mean, it's not going to be the prettiest thing you've ever ate, but you saw what went in it. You know it can't be bad. So I topped it with some sour cream, and I served it with some lime wedges to squeeze over. And I also made some homemade Mexican rice. I always keep the ingredients on hand to make that rice whenever we need it, because it's definitely one of my kids' favorites. But this turned out good. It wasn't like a favorite recipe, but it was good enough to make again. I really like the sweetness from the honey barbecue sauce that went in the pork paired with that spicy enchilada sauce. I think it worked out really well. And if you make pulled pork, you know that it makes enough to feed an army. So it's always nice to find different ways to use up those leftovers. Lastly, I'm going to show y'all that dessert that I was talking about. I'm going to make a pumpkin cheesecake dip. So I started by whipping up a half a block of room temperature cream cheese. To that, I'm going to add in one 15-ounce can of pumpkin. Make sure that it's just the pure pumpkin, and that's the only ingredient, not the pumpkin pie filling. You'll need 1 box of some instant vanilla pudding. I already have the sugar-free version in my pantry, so I just use that. You'll need just a dash of some pumpkin pie spice, and then you'll want to beat that together with an electric mixer or a stand-up mixer, doesn't matter, just until it's really nice and smooth. So for the last ingredient, you're going to need some Cool Whip, or I'm using the Kroger brand obviously, but same thing. You'll use that whole 8-ounce container, and you're just going to want to fold that in. And this did take a few minutes to like fully incorporate it. So it definitely took a lot of elbow grease, but put you on some good music and have fun with it. But that is done. So now we got to work on the presentation. So I'm pulling out this board that Josh got me a few years ago, and I'm just placing this cute little Halloween dish on top. So I was able to fit about half of that dip in it. So the other half, I just stored it in that Cool Whip container that I rinsed out and just put it in the fridge for the next day. But for the little dippers, I guess you'd call it, I did wash and slice up a couple Granny Smith apples. I'm sure any fruit would be good, but apples is definitely more geared towards like fall. I'm going to do some vanilla wafers. That was probably my favorite thing to dip in it. It went very good together. And then last minute, I decided to do some pretzels because I figured the kids would like that. So this is very quick to throw together. So if you are going to a party and you need like a last minute dish, let this be it. It was really good. It was nice and light and fluffy. It wasn't overly sweet, and that pumpkin flavor really pulled through. But that is it for this video. I hope that there was at least one recipe in here that will make it to your next meal plan. I want to thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you on my next video.